Hello to everyone. Welcome to a new podcast of wisdom, pattern, order, and disorder, and so more. This is your Pastor Yeti. Today I'm going to talk about living with a shadow. Spiritual transformation is often thought of as movement from darkness to light. In one sense, that is true, but in another sense, it is totally false. We forget that darkness is always present alongside the light. Pure light blinds, and only the mixture of darkness and light allows us to see. Shadows are required for our seeing, and God alone lives in perfect light. James 1:17. In a certain sense, we know the light most fully in contrast with its opposite. Christian theology has traditionally talked about the happy fault, the idea that if Christ had not been crucified, he would not have experienced the resurrection. Again, there is something we can only know by going through the night sea journey into the belly of the whale, from which we are spit up on an utterly new shore. Western civilization has failed to learn how to carry the shadow side. We did not evangelize through our living icon, Jesus. Instead, we developed a system involving winners and losers, which is not Jesus. Because we did not teach our people how to carry the Paschal mystery, it is now coming back to haunt us. And Catholics have no ability to carry the shadow side of the church, nor the shadow side of the papacy, nor the shadow side of the clergy. It is always all good or all bad, never both crucified and resurrected at the same time, as Christ is. Catholic politics is not known worldwide for creating negotiators, mediators, compromise, or peacemaking. Let's be humble enough to admit it and weep over our sins. In that sense, we are not the hope of the world. In many ways, it's been a constant dilemma of the Church. It wants to live in perfect light, where God alone lives. It does not like the shadow land called earth. It's only home. We see in Christian history the Eastern Church trying to create heavenly liturgy with little sense of social justice. Luther's abhorrence of his own shadow. The Swiss reformers trying to outlaw darkness. The Puritans trying to repress shadow. The Roman Catholic Church consistently unable and unwilling to see its own shadow. The typical believer afraid of their shadow, and the new fundamentalist preoccupied with Satan. Then comes the postmodern world in predictable pendulum swing, in love with shadows. And all of us, it seems, are trying to find ways to avoid the mystery in human lives instead of learning how to carry it patiently, as our humble Jesus did. There are no perfect structures, and there are no perfect people. There is only the struggle to get there. It is Christ's passion, the suffering of reality, that will save the world. Your patience endurance will win you your lives, says Luke 21 verse 19. Redemptive suffering instead of redemptive violence is the Jesus way. Patience comes from our attempts to hold together an always mixed reality, not from expecting or demanding a perfect reality. And that only makes us resentful and judgmental, which is what has characterizes much of the Christian history. I agree with those who have said they don't like religious people very much. Who likes people who can never deal patiently with limits and shadow, which is just about everything? One reason Nietzsche eventually did not trust Christians was because they seemed to be filled with resentment. False expectations created resentful people. Like Sisyphus rolling the stone up the hill and knowing it will roll back down. Grateful people emerge in a world richly defined where even the shadows are no surprise, but, in fact, opportunity. Our failure to carry the shadow as individuals has moved to a secular level too. We refuse to carry the shadow side of institutions, groups, nations, or periodics of history. We look for races and nations to blame instead of admitting that we are all in this human thing together. Every culture, in my opinion, is a mixture of shadows and light. There is not much point in deciding the exact percentages, or, like children, fighting over two hit one first. Go back for far enough, and we all oppressed others, or were oppressed ourselves. In the big picture, there is no moral high ground on which to stand. Whoever has the power oppresses, that is normative, and it includes native peoples, Jews, blacks, and women. When they are on the top, they do the same thing. And Jesus reframed the question around power, not ethnicity, religion, or gender. He stepped out of the whole cycle by riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, outside the symbols of power. Maybe we avoid shadows because they are on an in-depth experience of our own powerlessness and poverty. None of us wants to be a part of any imperfect group or institution. Perhaps because we did not resolve the question on a personal level, we have no ability to deal with it on an historical level. We keep looking for some perfect pedestal on which to stand, some place where we can be clean, pure, and above it all. Remember, the very notion of religion begins with the creating of the concept of impurity. Jesus ended religion as we know it forever. Shadowlands are good and necessary teachers. They are not to be avoided, denied, fled, or explained away. They are not even to be forgiven too quickly. First, like Ezekiel the prophet, we must eat the scroll that is lamentation, wailing, and mourning in our belly, and only eventually sweet as honey. See Ezekiel chapter 2, verses 9 to 3. When we're in the shadow, there's a loss of meaning and motivation. By the time most people reach middle age, they have experienced days when they just can't find life. Joy isn't there. We call it depression, and some form of it happens to most people at some time. In its extreme form, it requires medical attention, but clinical depression is not what we're talking about here, although it could take that form if we do not find God in it. There's a shadowland where we are led by our own stupidity, our own sin, our own selfishness, by living out of the false self. We have to work our way back out of this with brutal honesty, confessions, and surrenders. Some forgiveness, and often by some necessary restitution or apology. The old language would have called it repentance, penance, or striping, and by any account it is major surgery and feels like dying, although it also feels like immense liberation. We need help at this time. There's another shadowland, however, into which we're led by God and grace, and the nature of the journey itself. In many ways, the loss of meaning here is even greater, and sometimes the loss of motivation is greater. The loss of purpose, boundaries, and directions might be greater too. It really feels like the total absence of light, and thus the saints called it the dark night. But the difference is that we still sense that we have been led here intentionally somehow. We know we are in liminal space, betwixt and between, on the threshold, and we have to stay here until we have learned something essential. It is still no fun, filled with doubts and demons of every sort. But it is the dark night of God. All transformation takes place in such liminal space. The dark night into which we led ourselves by sin can also become the shadowland of God. And maybe this is even the most common pattern. But there is nevertheless a good shadowland and a bad shadowland. Basically, having to do with whether we see God in it. The wound can become the sacred wound, or it can just remain a bleeding, useless wound with a scrap that never heals. Salvation is, most commonly, sin overcome in the biblical tradition, not just sin avoided. It's the sin that becomes salvation, but it's the same event, the same experience. In shadow times, there's usually an overwhelming sense of not belonging, of not fitting in. There are days when we feel nothing will console us, and the old things that we used to do no longer work. There's no friend to call who could take this pain away. That's why, and that's when, of course, we're driving to prayer. We either find God then, or so go into a deep freeze formally. There's a reluctance to talk to helpful people, or to the people we once trusted. This feels like an act of rebellion against any kind of help. We close down, And many of my generation said proudly, don't trust anybody over 30. We had seen our father figures almost totally sell out the militarism and materialism. We could not trust them as mentors of spirituality or wisdom. We hated their shadows and then fell into our own. And unfortunately, we seem now to be experiencing a universal non-trust, a universal rebellion. Why should I trust any politician or priest or president? They've shown that they are not good leaders. We are, of course, half right. But there is another half, where often rebellion against our own inner priesthood, our own inner prophet, who might know the way for us. We're actually choosing to sit in the shadows. And maybe that is necessary too. And normally, in the shadows, there's restlessness, a type of inner pacing. It's almost as if going backward and forward on the same path is an image of who we are, not really wanting to go in any direction. Just turning around as if we are going to find the answer in between. Maybe we need this construction before we can rightly reconstruct on the foundations of the true self. In that restlessness, we not only can't pray, we don't want to pray. Of course, then we are throwing out the only inner authority we might have, or the only wisdom we might trust. We don't even want to trust God. We don't want to pray because God might have an answer. And then we would have to act. We don't want to act. The tragic, the paralysis, the self-pity all have a strange attraction. When we have reached this point, we usually start looking for someone to blame. The stupidity of blaming is that it dissolves us from solving the problem within ourselves. Blaming will not do the soul work. It will not remain with a paradox. It splits instead, releasing the eustress, good stress, the creativity, anxiety, yet staying with the paradox, refusing to compartmentalizes the good and the bad. Might be the most courageous thing we have ever done. In general, the only people I really trust to do reconstruction work are people who have paid their dues to deconstruction. If someone has never been able to see the shadow side, they haven't gained the right to talk the language of reconstruction. We need to have seen the shadow side, have felt the sore stomach, and have emerged renewed from the belly of the whale. We don't need naive people or people in denial. We need people who have been there, know the problems, and have met out and come out alive. We need to have pulled away from the idolatry of the system in order to gain the authority and the credibility to walk back in and work for reconstruction. If all we can do is criticize and negatively point out the shadow side, however, we have another set of problems. There's no gift of hope or positive energy here. There is only paralysis. An insecure community or group cannot tolerate criticism. As I said earlier, it was a sign of the maturity of the Roman Catholic Church that it could self-criticize during the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. A healthy family can, in fact, must own its dirty laundry. As the alcoholic says, we are as sick as our secrets. We are also as healthy as the way we criticize. Whatever you say about the 1960s, that movement began the current deconstructions in earnest. It was a healthy period of self-criticism of culture and church. How different it was from the idolatry over the 1980s, when both Pope and President, in that time it was Reagan, could no longer allow criticism. The Catholic Church was again the only way to go to heaven, and America was the promised land. It is especially strange that the Roman Catholic Church, which insists that sins cannot be forgiven without naming them in the confession according to the kind, number, and intention, has been unable to do the same. The Shadowlands are sacred ground. Our trust is that the God who has called us into this present moment, while also sustain us and lead us through it. Undoubtedly, we're in a shadowy, potentially transformative period. In a certain sense, there is only one definition of the biblical God, Yahweh, and Jesus are always the ones who bring the dead to life and call into being what does not yet exist. See both Deuteronomy 32, verse 39, and Romans 4:17. It is the one and only pattern of God, and we must be ready for it again and always. While material goods decreases as we make use of them, spiritual goods increases as we use them. We are ready to make use of our immense spiritual power. What is genuinely exciting is that many of these gifts, these gospel gifts, are being discovered and used outside the explicitly defined community of faith. Since we seem to have neglected them, I don't suppose God cares which group gets the credit. It is all God's work anyway. Maybe Jesus was speaking of his own community when he warned against burying the gifts out of fear. See Matthew 25:24-25, instead of using it with abundance. The religious worldview is essentially hope-filled, and any experience of grace tells us that history is not about us. In fact, my own life is not about me. History is more than human history. It's also God's history, the planet's history, the history of life and death, of God in all things. Who would not want to be a part of that? Sometimes I find archaeologists, nurses, marine biologists, and Hindu mothers of six who enter trustfully into the great mystery more than those of us who have been officially baptized into it. They are usably for God. As we get closer to the real thing, opposition will rise, just as it rose around Jesus. It's very scary whenever we're moving to a new synthesis or paradigm, especially for those who are heavily invested in the old. They usually have much to lose. They don't necessarily have ill will. It's just that they're living in the only world they've ever imagined. Human beings tend to live inside of our small comfort zones. We put all our trust and security in institutions, jobs, explanations, even in sacred things like family. It's no surprise that Jesus has to call the first disciples away, not from bad things, but from good things like family and job. See Mark 1:19-20. People will feel we are being negative or violent when we deconstruct their false worlds, because that is all they have. If you build your whole world, your whole life around your job and your reputation, you naturally don't want to let go of them. You will fight not to die. Ultimately, however, the naming and dismantling of the false self is profoundly liberating, but we have yet to learn that. In spirituality, there are basically two paths: the path of the fall and the path of the return. The path of the fall is directed and legitimated by the prophets, who teach us how to go into shadow creatively, how to let things fall apart. They teach us how to lose gratefully, how to let go without fear. The role of the prophet is to direct and legitimate necessary deconstructions. The deconstructions of what I would call the false self. The prophet's path is of descent and is never popular nor easy. It is about letting go of illusion and toppling false gods. The prophets are always killed. The other path is the path of the return. That's been the role of the priestly class. Through priests talk of union, communion, love, transcendence, religion, connecting this world and the next world, and giving back a coherent world of meaning. Everybody usually likes a priest, and they quickly become established and comfortable in almost all cultures. We've had way too much priesthood and not nearly enough prophecy, in my humble opinion. The result often has been religious for religion's sake, all paths of return with no path of the fall. How can we return to a world when we have never fallen away from the old one? Priests tell self-satisfied people about communion with God, yet their God and their need is still so small or even false. How can we know the light if we never named the shadows? And I leave this question with you. May the peace of God be with you and stays with you. And may his light shine upon you and keep you safe. This is your Pastor Yeti. Bye-bye.